The empire did not fall in a single night, nor with a final scream heard across its vast territories. It began with a silence that spread through the streets of Rome, subtle and almost polite, as if history itself were holding its breath. Markets still opened, soldiers still marched, and magistrates still spoke of order. Yet beneath the ritual of normal life, something irreversible was unfolding. The marble forums reflected the same sunlight they always had, but the confidence that built them had begun to erode. No trumpet announced the beginning of the end. Instead, it arrived, disguised as routine. And while citizens debated taxes, borders, and rumors from distant provinces, no one understood what was coming next, or how close the center of power was to fracturing from within. For generations, Rome had defined a permanence. Its roads stitched continents together, its laws imposed a shared rhythm on distant cultures, and its armies enforced a sense of inevitability. Daily life followed predictable patterns. Merchants negotiated under stone arches, families gathered in crowded insulae, and veterans recounted campaigns that once expanded the world. The empire felt eternal not because it was unchallenged, but because it had always adapted. Yet this confidence masked a growing imbalance. Wealth concentrated behind guarded doors, while urban populations swelled beyond the city's capacity. The rituals continued: festivals, speeches, ceremonies, projecting stability. But beneath the choreography of power, the machinery sustaining it was straining, and the illusion of control depended on people believing tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Long before visible cracks appeared, warning signs circulated in whispers. Frontier garrisons reported increasing pressure. Supply caravans arrived late, and coinage slowly lost its value. These shifts felt administrative, distant from daily survival, so they were absorbed as temporary inconveniences. Families adjusted to rising prices, traders recalculated risks, and officials issued reassurances wrapped in formal language. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly, inside ledgers and grain shipments. Even the atmosphere seemed unchanged. Vendors shouting, iron striking stone, children weaving through crowds. Yet trust, the invisible currency of empire, was thinning. Each compromise made to preserve stability introduced new fragility, and by the time concern reached public conversation, the underlying system was already negotiating with exhaustion. As pressure mounted, decisions meant to stabilize the empire carried unintended consequences. Military spending surged while civic infrastructure decayed. Leaders rotated rapidly, each promising restoration while inheriting a weaker foundation. Soldiers pledged loyalty less to institutions than to commanders who could guarantee pay. In provincial towns, administrators struggled to enforce distant policies against immediate realities. The tension was not explosive, it was cumulative, layering uncertainty onto routine. Citizens sensed that authority sounded different, more urgent, less assured. Rumors traveled faster than official decrees, and each new reform felt reactive rather than visionary. Still, public life continued, because routine is resilient. But every hurried solution revealed how tightly the empire's survival was bound to fragile agreements that were beginning to unravel. The strain became visible in the rhythm of everyday survival. Grain shortages disrupted familiar diets, forcing households to improvise. Tax collectors arrived with greater insistence, while wages lagged behind rising costs. In marketplaces, conversations turned cautious, measured by what could safely be spoken. Soldiers on leave described overstretched borders and uncertain commands. Infrastructure aqueducts, roads, fortifications received minimal upkeep, and small failures accumulated into persistent inconvenience. None of these disruptions felt catastrophic in isolation. That was the danger. Each adjustment trained the population to accept decline as temporary. Yet the cumulative effect reshaped expectations. By the time people realized they were adapting to a new normal, the empire's capacity to recover had already diminished. Political authority, once projected as unshakable, began to feel negotiated. Power struggles unfolded not only in palaces, but in barracks and provincial capitals. Alliances shifted with alarming frequency, and legitimacy became a contested resource. Citizens observed these transitions with a mixture of fatigue and apprehension. Leadership changes promised renewal, but delivered continuity of crisis. Administrative coherence fractured as local priorities overshadowed imperial directives. The empire still functioned, but coordination, its defining strength, was deteriorating. Decisions made to secure immediate loyalty undermined long-term unity. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late to restore the seamless authority that once synchronized Rome's immense geography. External pressures intensified precisely when internal resilience was weakest. Border defenses, stretched thin, relied on negotiation as much as force. Migrating groups were alternately resisted, recruited, or settled, blurring the distinction between ally and adversary. Frontier communities adapted through uneasy coexistence, while central authorities framed these arrangements as strategic necessity. The atmosphere shifted from confidence to contingency. Every diplomatic concession bought time but introduced unpredictability. Citizens far from the borders felt these pressures indirectly through taxes, conscription, and rumor. The empire's edges no longer felt distant. They felt connected to household survival. Yet even as warnings multiplied, many believed Rome's history of endurance guaranteed recovery. The system still stood, but its balance depended on compromises accumulating faster than stability could absorb them. The moment failure became undeniable did not resemble a cinematic collapse. It arrived through cascading interruptions. Unpaid troops asserting control, provincial leaders acting autonomously, supply chains fragmenting. Administrative decisions lagged behind unfolding realities. Urban centers experienced waves of uncertainty as security flooded. The familiar choreography of governance faltered, replaced by improvisation. Citizens navigated shifting authorities, uncertain which laws would hold tomorrow. Public spaces that once symbolized order echoed with cautious movement. There was no singular breaking point, only a series of thresholds crossed quietly. Each adaptation preserved immediate survival while eroding systemic coherence. The empire did not shatter. It loosened. And in that loosening, the structure that had defined generations began to feel provisional. Human consequences unfolded unevenly, but relentlessly. Families relocated in search of safety or opportunity, fragmenting established communities. Skilled laborers repurposed their expertise toward survival rather than civic ambition. Social hierarchies blurred as necessity reshaped status. Religious and cultural institutions stepped into roles once filled by imperial administration, offering continuity amid uncertainty. Fear rarely manifested as panic. It appeared as calculation. What to keep, where to go, whom to trust. Routine persisted in altered form, because daily life demands continuation. Yet the psychological shift was profound. The assumption of permanence gave way to conditional thinking. People no longer planned for imperial stability. They planned for adaptability, signaling that the center's promise of protection had fundamentally weakened. As centralized authority receded, regional identities strengthened. Local governance structures emerged to manage defense, trade, and justice, creating patchwork systems of order. These adaptations were pragmatic, not ideological. Communities prioritized survival over allegiance, forging alliances based on proximity and necessity. Infrastructure once maintained by imperial coordination fell to local stewardship, unevenly preserved or abandoned. Economic patterns recalibrated around regional networks, reducing dependence on distant capitals. The empire's administrative language persisted, but its practical influence diminished. What had once been a unified system transformed into interconnected fragments. Continuity existed, but it was decentralized. The empire did not vanish overnight. It diffused into localized structures that redefined stability according to immediate realities, rather than inherited authority. In the long view, the empire's transformation reshaped political imagination. Governance models shifted toward regional autonomy, influencing legal traditions, economic organization, and cultural identity. Former imperial territories reinterpreted Rome's legacy through their own circumstances, preserving elements that served new frameworks. Infrastructure remnants guided settlement patterns, while institutional memory informed emerging authorities. The collapse functioned less as an ending than as a redistribution of systems and ideas. Its consequences echoed across centuries, informing how societies conceptualized power, resilience, and adaptation. The absence of centralized control did not erase Roman influence, it recontextualized it. The empire's afterlife existed in the structures that replaced it, each carrying fragments of a system that once promised permanence. What remains is not the image of a city falling, but the understanding of how complex systems dissolve. Rome's final days revealed collapse as a process measured in compromises, adaptations, and gradual recalibrations of expectation. Streets once built to symbolize eternity continued to carry footsteps, even as the authority that commissioned them faded. People did not witness an ending. They lived through a transition whose significance only history would fully articulate. The silence that marked the beginning returned, transformed into reflection. Civilizations rarely disappear. They evolve beyond recognition. And in that quiet evolution lies the enduring lesson. Permanence is often a story societies tell themselves, until routine reveals that even the most formidable structures are subject to time.